Good morning. Thank you for joining us at Trees Are Infrastructure 2. My name is Molly Robinson, and I'm very happy to be here today and joined by Landis Wenger, Tony Gliot, and Sharen Hauri, and you will hear from each of them in a few minutes. But I wanted to kick off our conversation today around this idea about trees as amenity, or not just thinking about them as amenities, but thinking about trees in our public realm as infrastructure in and of themselves. They are as vital as roads, sewers, and power lines. We often don't feel or understand their value until they are gone. And I will give you one kind of very notable example from the last couple of years. This is an example of trees as symbolic or even sacred assets for a community. This is the sycamore gap tree pictured here in 2022. It was apparently planted in the 1800s and was one of Britain's most photographed trees, in part because of its location in the planting along a historic wall, but also at this gap in the mountains with the sky in the background. It was illegally cut down in the early morning of the 28th of September, 2023. The act sparked widespread shock, grief, and anger locally, nationally, even globally. Many people felt the loss deeply, not just of a tree, but of an important symbol of their community. In the criminal case against the two men who cut down the tree, the judge said this tree was not just a tree, it was sacred, woven into people's lives, identity, and sense of place. And while this example represents an extreme act of senselessness, we cut down trees, live and healthy ones, all the time in our cities. We fail to consider their cultural, ecological, and aesthetic value as meaningful. So our framing today, trees as infrastructure, we can think about their cultural significance, their importance in ecological functions, not just for the sake of nature with a capital N, but also their role in heat waves, filtering air, reducing flooding, and strengthening community identity as well. Yet we often treat them as expendable. So if you remember one thing from today, please remember this. And this is my framing, by the way. Cutting a tree is like cutting a sewer line. We would never do the latter for convenience, but we do the former every day. And that's something that I'm hoping we are inviting that conversation today through this session. So as we get started today, I hope that you can all take out your phone because we're going to play a game. Winners and losers. The game show where we ask the question, who wins when trees clash with developments? Okay, so round one, utility and street construction versus trees. In Salt Lake City, a public utilities and transportation project on 2100 South and Sugar House replaced 90-year-old sewer lines and added a shared use path and safer crosswalks, also upgrading busy intersections. Mayor Mendenhall mentioned this yesterday in her opening address. Along the corridor stood mature street trees, providing shade, stormwater capture, and neighborhood character. Hopefully this comes up and you can't read all the questions or the answers. So I fix this. Here we go. Nope, you still can't read all of the things. Okay. I had this working last night, I promise. Okay, I will read them to you. Hold on one second. Sorry, the formatting of the answers should be smaller fonts so you can read the whole thing. They show up on the app. Oh, that's wonderful. That's even better. Well, maybe you can read it there, but I can't read them to you. Um, Okay. I'm going to ask the question. When projects like this occur in your city, what is the most likely outcome for the trees? Are trees protected by tree safe construction practices through some policy in your code? Are trees compromised because there is no policy? Are trees removed and replaced at some point before or after the project? Is there some kind of negotiated middle ground where some trees are removed, some trees are saved, but there's no consistency from project to project? And then the last is, I have no idea what my community's tree protection policy says, if we have one at all. Okay. Sounds like there's a consensus here. There's often some kind of negotiated middle ground. Let's keep that in mind as we move through the rest of our game today and our conversation. Still some voting going on. Is everybody done? All right, negotiated middle ground. Tony, I want you to keep that in mind. Okay, round 2, sustainable transportation versus trees. In Stuttgart, Germany, there's a project called Stuttgart 21, a massive infrastructure project to rebuild the Stuttgart main train station, which involved undergrounding the rail and converting a terminus into a through station. 282 mature trees in the historic Schlossgarten Park stand in the way. Wait, I'm sorry, this skipped. I should say, I needed to tell you what actually happened in that previous scenario, and somehow it skipped through that. So on 21st Hundred South, some trees were damaged and reported to the city using the MySOC app. Thank you, Sharen. Many trees were protected, some trees were intentionally removed, and over 150 new trees planted. Okay, now we're going to go to Stuttgart. In Stuttgart, 282 mature trees in the historic Schlossgarten Park stood in the way of this potential project. The trees are part of a beloved public space seen as living heritage by residents. Project leaders argue the redevelopment will modernize rail, improve mobility across Europe, so not just the region, but the mega region, and fulfill larger sustainability objectives. Okay, so in your city, what do you think would happen in a situation like this? Do trees and culture prevail? Are heritage and culture protected through policy? Does the mega project win? Trees are removed in that scenario. Do public protests erupt? Does activism delay the project or even prevent it from happening? Or is there some kind of compromise that's reached? I'll give you all a few minutes to answer that poll. Okay, looks like the mega project wins, though there may be some kind of compromise that's possible. So what actually happened here? In Stuttgart, there were massive public protests that led to global attention on the project. However, many trees were still cut down, some were relocated or replaced. The conflicts, however, reshaped national conversations on public participation in these kinds of projects, transparency of government decisions, and the social cost of infrastructure. There was also a massive delay on this project because they had to kind of go back and redo a lot of their public participation. And It resulted in a 7-year delay. The station is still not completed. These protests happened back in 2010. Okay, round 3, development versus trees. A developer proposes a new housing development in a leafy Atlanta neighborhood. The site has 5 mature oaks, each 80+ years old. Under the city's tree protection ordinance, these trees are recognized as vital city infrastructure, providing stormwater management, cooling, air quality, and public health benefits. The developer offers to replace the mature trees with twice as many new saplings. The ordinance requires preservation of mature canopy where feasible, or face high mitigation fees and replacement requirements. In your city, how would this scenario likely play out? Full preservation, do those mature trees, are they protected through policy or design? Partial preservation, some trees are saved, others are removed to balance competing objectives. There's removal with mitigation. Trees are cleared, developers pay fees or plant new trees. Or full removal, the ordinance allows clearance with minimal preservation. It's fun watching the poll numbers come in on this. All right. I think this is a good question because it looks like it's maybe kind of split 1/3 for these last 3: partial preservation, removal with mitigation, or full removal. Yet very few cities may have full preservation. So what actually happens? As I said, this was an example from Atlanta. In this case, the developer was allowed to remove all 5 mature oaks. Atlanta's tree protection ordinance allowed removal in exchange for mitigation fees or replacement with a 2-to-1 replacement ratio. This ordinance required preservation where feasible, but feasibility was interpreted quite broadly, favoring development. There was some public opposition. It was considered quite strong, but ultimately the city prioritized the housing goals over the preservation of the trees. And Atlanta recently adopted an update to their tree protection ordinance, which will go into effect January 1st of 2026, increasing their mitigation fees to $140 per diameter inch of tree trunk, and increasing fines for illegal tree removal from $100,000 per acre to $200,000 per acre. Thank you for playing Winners and Losers, the game show where we ask, who wins when trees clash with development? Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you for playing. Okay, I want to invite Landis Wenger up here. He's going to share another real case study with us from Logan. Come on up.
Thank you. I think I was invited to be the villain on the panel. We are discussing a project that I'm tangentially involved with up in Logan, where we're taking down several trees. So what to preface all this with my tree hugger credentials, I do love trees. I've lived around trees my whole life. The background picture, if you can see it at all, that is the view of the valley I grew up in Pennsylvania. My house is actually on top of the mountain in the back. So this is where I spent my youth. Spend more time outside than inside, more time with trees and with people. And that still continues with me through my careers, through my volunteer work in my community. So I want to start that I don't take pleasure in killing trees. But this is probably a project you've heard of. Maybe this is a picture you've seen in the Salt Lake Tribune. But this is Canyon Road in Logan, um, and the issue is there are 17 green ash trees there. They're all over 100 years old, and the Logan needs, they're out of compliance with their water availability for their residents, and so the state is on their case. They're going to get a fine if they don't increase their water supply on the west side of the city. And so to do that project, looking at putting a water line under the road, under Canyon Road, and with the condition of those really old trees and their roots, we're looking to take out 14 of those 17 ash trees. So again, I am the villain. So when this was realized, there were some couple council members at Logan City that looked at their projects and their plans in the area and realized that this opens up an opportunity, which is how I got involved, where we have a master plan trail along this road, right where the trees are. And so with the trees being removed anyway, this is an opportunity to, well, we're already doing a capital campaign, already going to be reconstructing the road. We can save costs and increase the infrastructure we have for this neighborhood by putting a paved trail in there, which is how I got involved. But I wanted to share some details about this. So Logan City, they got a lot of pushback. They hired an arborist to go up and evaluate every one of those trees, study their root conditions, study their limbs, and they found that most of them, not surprising for how old they are and for being street trees, most of them were not in great condition. And so a couple of them have root fungus and other things that were recommended for removal even without the project, just for safety concerns. But that's where we determined that 3 of those trees were in good enough condition that they would be able to survive construction. And so construction will be working around those. They also, Logan paid JUB, who's on the project, to look at 6 other alignments, potential alignments, where the water could go so they could save these 14 trees. And each of those alignments is a lot longer. The next cheapest, by conservative estimates, would be a $2 million additional price to the project, and each of them would cut down more trees. Several of those other alignments would go through naturalized forested areas, cutting down several more trees than the 14 along the route. But my big question in this, I like thinking of trees as infrastructure. But the question with all infrastructure is who do we prioritize? Who is this infrastructure for? And so I just threw up here some statistics from Logan, but I really wanted to highlight, as this is a view of the island, and this is their tree canopy now. Some of these trees along here are actually the 14 that are probably going to disappear. But so in the island, it is a much wealthier part of Logan. It is, by almost every metric, it is more affluent. And there's a reason. I actually got Logan City's planner to admit that there's a reason why these trees are causing such a big stir, where they just took down a tree on my street within a block of my house. And my street has very, very few street trees. And they just took one down. And no one told me about it. But everyone along Canyon Road has gotten a knock from the mayor and from a council member to explaining the project, talking about their opinions, while they're just taking down trees in my poorer part of town without even talking to us. And also, just want to highlight that these trees are not actually allowed to be grown as street trees in Logan. They're really old, so they predate this ordinance. But Logan would not allow these trees to be here nowadays. And for those of you that might not live on the East Coast, that's because ash trees are impacted by the emerald ash borer. If you don't understand the trauma of that summer camp I worked for, we took down every ash tree within our developed area because it's just a really scary thing when all the trees are dying overnight and limbs are falling on cabins and things. So we don't have that here in Utah yet, but one way you convert it to have in here is these ash trees are not native to our valley. up in Logan, and so not giving them that home to start does help. Yeah, so I think I'm trying to keep it short. I'm sure you have lots of questions. I'm happy to answer them, but that's what we're looking at.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tony Gliot. I'm the city forester for Salt Lake City, and I disagree with almost everything Landis just said. Well, before we get started, keep in mind too, almost everyone I ever talked to who's a developer, a transportation professional, a planner, who's faced with delivering a project where tree removal is necessary, the first thing they say to me is, I love trees personally. And I have many trees in my yard. Trees are great, but we got to do something else here. So let me just quickly start by saying infrastructure. The title of this presentation is that trees are infrastructure too. So just really quickly to get this out of the way, a couple definitions of infrastructure. The first one is kind of the infrastructure that most of us think about when we talk about infrastructure in urban areas, and that's roads and bridges and power grids, things like that. These are physical structures and facilities that support the functioning of society. I like this group, and by the way, the planners are the front lines of defense for trees, not foresters. So keep that in mind. If you leave here with one thing, please leave here with that. Trees, I like to say, are dynamic living civil infrastructure, or just infrastructure plus. They are structures, they are facilities and systems that support functioning society, but they also have other responsibilities, and that is to support the health of the natural environment as well. Examples of dynamic living infrastructure are not just trees, though they're the biggest and longest lived of those, but lower plants. Then we got creeks, rivers, streams. These are things that are treated unfairly, I would say, just like trees are. I mean, we put our creeks and streams in pipes so that we can do other things. We take our open lands and we pave over them. We put our plants in pots or hanging baskets, and our trees, of course, are relegated to a second or third or fourth or no priority. And then the last bit of living infrastructure would be our people. I mean, without people, our cities are not going to function, and our people also have the responsibility of supporting the health and well-being of both society and the natural environment. So because trees are a little bit different than other forms of infrastructure, maybe less understood in the context of developing cities, there are extra challenges associated with preserving and maintaining them and even placing them in our developing cities. Cost is first and foremost. In the one of the examples that Molly gave in the winners and losers, it's almost presented as a success that Atlanta raised their cost for tree mitigation. Not only is it two inches for every 1 inch removed, but they raised that value, that inch multiplier, to $140 per inch. I just did the quick math on that. That means each of those 5 ancient oak trees that were removed to accommodate this project probably cost the developer about $10,000. So that's $50,000 in order to do what they wanted to do on their multi-million-dollar project, which resulted in loss of an organism that was generations old and would take multiple generations to even get close to replacing. That's that's bullet point number 3, undervaluation here. That's a huge challenge as we seek to protect trees. And then they require space. I mean, I don't know of any other infrastructure. I mean, let's take sewer, for example. If someone were to say, hey, our solution to the sewer being in this place when we want to put other things there is to simply take out the sewer, but guess what? We'll give you 2 extra sewers for every sewer we took out in a different part of the town. Is that going to solve the problem, or is that faulty logic? This is what we're faced with, though. Trees are undervalued compared to the different things that they're competing with, and that leads to I put here poor planning and design. I don't want to be too hard on planners and landscape architects and others, but we're faced with trying to compromise. And I think Molly's example of the winners and losers tells us that compromise is what's happening, but trees are not winning that compromise. And as a result, we end up with a less livable, less beautiful, less healthy urban space. And so the last thing I'll quickly end with here is there are questions that all professionals that are associated with development and growth of urban places should be asking. The first is, do we really have to choose between one type of infrastructure and another? I say no, we don't. I think that what we do is we get funding to build a street or to build a trail, and then we focus myopically on that, and we just kind of everything else takes a second priority. If that's the case, then what we should be doing is pursuing funding for roads that have trees and trails that have trees and buildings and developments that incorporate tree canopy, and then maybe they would get a better chance at this. Now, are we willing to think outside of the box and maybe put a little more time in to making sure that we can have solutions to account for all infrastructure that we desire? And are we willing to pay for what we truly want? We are talking about money ultimately here. You cannot build a road or a trail system and have trees, put a line item in for $300 per tree and expect that you're going to successfully create an environment for trees or protect trees that are there. And then, lastly is what kind of cities do we want to live in? You people are building cities. You're building generations long infrastructure. That's a big responsibility. But I would challenge everyone to say, hey, what are we trying to build and not compromise on what that vision truly is? So that's it for me for now.
Hello. Thanks for joining us here. And I'll introduce myself, but first I want to thank the other panelists because I've become a better tree hugger. It's possible. Over the last couple of years working and listening to these folks, because we've been working on a few things together and just sharing information a lot more. And my first piece of advice is just make friends with a tree hugger and just start picking their brains and just kind of make that snowball, because I was trained as a landscape architect. Thank you, Utah State Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning. But I didn't really know much about trees until really being in a city and figuring it out and seeing all the different ways that you have to deal with this issue. So moving on, I work for the city of South Salt Lake. My name is Sharen Hauri. I've been there for 14 years. I started off as urban design director. This is how Molly and I met years ago, saying we're going to build better cities, and here's some of the steps we're going to take between transportation, just general landscape architecture, and between landscaping. And through my time there, I've ended up becoming in charge of a number of departments, which gives me some influence on a number of different people who actually care about these issues, who don't care about these issues, because our number one objective is building better neighborhoods. And pretty much everyone in a small city wants to build a better neighborhood and wants to build a better downtown. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about, is where we're at as a city and what opportunities we're taking, actually not to protect trees, but to move forward and build trees that in the future are worthy of protecting. Because right now we're losing trees faster than we're replacing them. We're replacing with trees that are going to be gone in 5 to 10 years because we don't plant them properly and plan for them properly. So our big opportunity right now for South Salt Lake is on the top. That's our downtown, which is approximately 21st South and State Street at the corner or the elbow of I-80 and I-15. Shown right there is the spaghetti bowl. If you squint at that, you can see a handful of trees in the top part drawn. They're actually in Salt Lake City on a residential street. You pretty much don't see a single tree in this, except by R.C. Willey. They did a good job. Nothing's there now because it was formerly industrial. So our opportunity right now is that we have a lot of interest in urban forestry from our city leaders, our city departments, and our developers who are trying to build a downtown that people want to live in, of a place that nobody wants to live in right now, amongst warehouses and so on. So we really have a blank slate, and we have these bigger lots. You can kind of see some of the bigger lots where people are just doing full-scale clearing. And it's difficult in cities like Salt Lake City, where every inch of urban space has pretty much been claimed for the last 50 to 100 years, and you can't just go in, you're doing surgery, you can't just go in and take everything out and start over. We have some instances where we can do that and start over with either the width of the street or just the fact that there was nothing except for a parking lot abutting that. And then we have a third really thing going for us, which is a budget tool. We adopted this whole area as a RDA zone and this HGRZ zone, which most of you are familiar with. So we have funding coming to this that is a real boost to the area. We just don't know if it's actually enough to cover the trees. We started saying it's going to cover the trees, but we got a million other things, mostly infrastructure to cover. So we're trying to elevate this in the list of priorities. But our challenge is our utilities. We do have utilities. It's not one size fits all. So you try to develop ordinances or standards for this, and every street's different, and every block is different, and every utility is different. So you know you're going to go into this as a negotiation with the developer and with the landowner and engineer, but you don't even really have you don't have solid ground to start on because it's going to be uninspected. Second one is we're trying to tackle right now is just land use law, and water law. If developers want to deal with their stormwater, this picture on the bottom, the soil cell, is a great solution. It's also called R tanks, or just any underground stormwater retention works, but they work really well for trees, and we'll show a detail on that later. But how do you cross boundaries, cross responsibilities and funding with these things that are essentially getting into water law, to property rights, and so on? So we're kind of working through that now. Whose property is it? Whose stormwater is it? And so on. And then last, we're really doing a lot of work right now on street cross sections because we have an old street grid, which is great, but there's a lot of inconsistency in it. And moving forward, there's a lot of improvement, and we're going kind of block by block saying this block deserves to have these elements. Every block deserves to have trees, but as Tony shared and Evermost shared, you're also trying to hit a trail and bury your power lines and all sorts of other things at the same time. So we had been working, and me personally, on proposed urban tree standards for our downtown. It's taking a while. Those things work better when you do like a trial on them. So this trial and error of actually talking to developers and see how it's actually going to work for them has been helping push us along. And we haven't done anything up developers, but I will talk about a project we have done. Sorry, I just wanted to point at this. It's been an easy sales pitch for our leaders as well as our developers and everyone else to say, here's what you get with a tree that's planted in compacted soil, which is your typical construction method, versus uncompacted, which is a soil cell, or could just be open on the fall scene, just could be an open grass or open planting area. Either one works. We're focused on how much soil can this tree get to live. So this is a detail of what soil cells look like on the left. And this kind of looks like what we're aiming to do, which is you've got a tree in a pit, but then to the right side of that tree are the soil cells that give extra space for those trees to grow. Essentially, the soil cell's job is to hold up a sidewalk, hold up some sort of pavement. We wouldn't, and conveniently, if you have utilities, you can also run them through those cells if you need to, going through. If you want to learn more about this, a great book to read is James Urban, Up by Roots, and he focuses almost entirely on soils. If you want to deep dive into soils, which I'd never appreciated to the level I do now, it's the only thing that matters. I'll just say that. Nothing else really matters. So my efforts to write an ordinance are really focused around how much soil you're going to give that tree. Once you say that you need soil, you need to inspect for soil, but pretty much any soil is going to work for most trees as long as you get it uncompacted. So those minimum soil quantities, I'll tell you that the large tree, and I've been trying to push the idea of having only large trees as street trees. They just work better. Small trees are like hit you in the face if you're on a bike, But the large tree at 1,000 cubic feet means you need a trench that's 30 feet long, 3 feet deep, and 10 feet wide. That's big. That's a lot. But you can achieve that by putting pavement on top of it or leaving it open if you have a set that much space. So one project where we actually are achieving this, we're getting quite close to the finish line, is the Life on State project, which is streetscape improvements on State Street through this downtown area. We are going to be doing construction in 2026, we hope. It's taken us a long time to get here. We've had the money for a few years. But we're doing that soil cell detail from the previous page on on a few blocks just south of 21st South. And our goal is to look on the right side of Salt Lake City, just a nice picture of what is your capital with a tree-lined street leading up to it can look like. And then Salt Lake City did a nice job with the center median recently, also is in Life on State funding. And our goal is to get to that point. And I'm going to point out, if you can look teeny tiny on the far left side, there's a scree tree there that's probably been there for about 5 years. And that's kind of the standard detail that people would use to put a tree in a grate on a surrounded by pavement. which on State Street, we actually really don't need that much extra pavement because most people are traveling by car. We really need the trees more than we need that space for people to come and go in their cars. So a lot of our detail has been like, what's the amount of space for all the different travelers? And what's the amount of space for the tree and the soil? And I'm trying to get away from that detail on the left, which is very popular. It's just everyone's standard. But it's kind of improving over the last 25 years in this climate and in climate change that it doesn't really get you the tree you're hoping for. And those pictures that someone lived marketing out in the hallway of the really pretty building with the giant trees in front of it, that is not reality unless we seriously change what we're doing. I think that's all I had to say. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to open up a panel discussion conversation with our panelists. I want to invite all of you into this conversation. I do have a few questions to kick us off. What is the biggest barrier to treating trees as infrastructure in Utah today?
I think it's well, there are two things. One is foresight, and the second is funding.
I'll go to the planning as failing to plan. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Failing to plan is planning to fail. You cannot achieve this without planning. And then I think that the other biggest obstacle is the people. It takes people who want to do this. I'm in a really lucky position where I'm right now, where we've got on this kick and people are willing to do it. When you have career planners, career engineers, we love you for your consistency, but we need to change our thinking if we're going to change what we do.
I want to open that question out to the audience. What do you see as the biggest barrier to treating trees as infrastructure in Utah today? Anyone have a barrier? Leave it be.
So I'm the author of A Love Letter to Suburbia, How to Restore the American Village. And a lot of it is just that the free market is catered toward a suburban setup. So there is no locality in our communities anymore, with R1 zoning as the favorite. Basically, unmitigated capitalism is what's happening. You take away people's home economies and you put them in the commercial district, and it gives developers a lot of power to come in and say that they're not going to put trees or they're going to take trees. One of my first committee meetings, Lehigh Council, they were putting in some high density units in Traverse Mountain, and they voted yes, even though there were going to be 4,000 cars into the area. But the developer said, we just don't have enough space to do the 1 tree per unit law. And so he kind of convinced the council that they weren't going to do trees there either. So I think the goal is to put power back into the hands of the people and create infrastructure that is walkable through home economies. That was my solution.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I want to move on to our next question. Did someone else want to share a barrier?
Yeah, and maybe just ask the question, because I saw some interesting data that compares Salt Lake.
I saw some interesting data that compared Salt Lake City to other cities of similar sizes across the U.S., some in arid, some not in arid. And Utah was in the top tier of the number of trees that we have. Salt Lake City was. So I'm not sure we're doing a bad job. And I'd like to hear from you what you think is the right amount of trees versus what's a poor amount of trees. How do you view that in your perspective positions? I'll take a shot at that really quickly. First and foremost, I agree that we are doing a good job. Oh, well, let me put it this way. I agree that we are a top city as far as our not only our diversity of trees, but our number of trees and the age of the trees in Salt Lake City proper. However, there's an alarming trend going on right now in our city. I mean, we have a legacy forest right here, which means that almost every tree we have was planted. It was chosen and then nurtured to be there. And this is a forgotten truth here right now. I've been Salt Lake City's forester for 11 years. The first year I was here, and this is consistent with the years previous, we were removing approximately 500 trees a year. Over the last 5 years, we're removing 1,400 trees a year. That's 3 times as much, practically. And this is the current trend. So yes, do we have an amazing urban forest? We do. Are we rapidly growing? We are. Are we losing trees at an alarming rate? Absolutely. And we're not losing small trees. We're losing our biggest, most beneficial trees. So we have a lot of work to do.
Tony, what are we losing them to? Is it just development and infrastructure projects, or are we losing them because of other factors like climate change or the care that is not going into the trees?
And I'm glad you asked that. That answer made me sound like I was anti-development, which I'm not. But the overwhelming reason that our trees die is because of lack of care. Partly there's a lot of people moving to our area now, myself included, that are not from this area, that didn't have to water trees to keep them alive. We have a high percentage of rentals in the city where people are just not don't expect to maintain their own trees in front of their properties. And then also people are just not as engaged in their landscapes as they were even just a generation ago. So lots of factors, but still an alarming trend.
I'll add with older cities or communities and lower income, trees tend to be planted 50 years ago in South Salt Lake and then just stay there because people can't afford to trim them, remove them, etc. But as those residents pass away and move out and somebody else buys it and has, in this case, many times a lot more money, they're very gung-ho about their landscape. And more often than not, they're gung-ho about a waterized landscape and anti-weed trees. I agree that weed trees are a pain, but they are, at this point, some of the only trees we have left in some of our neighborhoods. The really big old elms and really big old ashes, which are threatened. But just because a tree is on the do not plant list doesn't mean it's on the do not kill list. So I think that's a part of it as well.
I think this is a good question. I think this is what I was trying to get to was throwing up the statistics between my neighborhood and the island neighborhood in Mogan, where the island neighborhood's tree canopy currently is way higher than the tree canopy where I live. So to partially answer that question, I think equity has to be a part of this conversation. If we say 56% tree canopy is good for wealthy people, then that should also be what we say is good for low-income people. But also, this is another area where I do have a different perspective coming from the East Coast, that was the first thing I thought when I visited Utah for the first time, was just how many trees are in our urban landscape here. And that's something you don't really see where I grew up in the Rust Belt, because the trees they're outside of town. You go out of town to find trees, but that hasn't been prioritized in town. And so I think that's another part of the conversation. I've supported the Utaogwa bear massacre site that the Shoshone tribe is developing. And the past 5 years, a lot of that progress has been killing trees and plants that are not indigenous to the land. And now they're starting to plant indigenous plants. But that is another conversation point that I hear a lot here is as the trees are justification for this is why it's good that the pioneers and the Europeans came to Utah, because indigenous people would not have planted this many trees. So I think that is a part of the conversation too, where trees are infrastructure. We need them for a healthy and sustainable life. But there's I think nuance to that question. I don't think it's a bad question to ask. When is it enough trees? When is it too many trees?
I don't believe the native peoples would have paved over all of their urban area as well, though.
Good point. What misconceptions about trees get in the way of building healthy urban forest, or maybe it's misconceptions about trees getting in the way of development, for that matter, or change.
I'll just start with the just native versus non-native. I have to be a tree hugger for all trees, but many residents will come and say, "Well, this is a rationale. If I get like up in the neighborhood, you guys should be cutting this down." They're like, "Well, we don't have a way to replace it right now. We don't have our irrigation system there or the stewards for that land. So, like, the better one, a tree is better than no tree at all." And I think that I've been fighting this all the time. Like, I know you don't want that species that it's on the bad list, but it's probably it's going to be better than nothing at this point, and it can be very hard to get the ideal species that you like and you want to grow. And I'm on this kick kind of saying we can't all just plant small and medium trees. And it's like, I want a tree small enough for my yard, and I keep telling people that it's not going to actually shade your house ever. And then also my last one is, if you Google and say this tree is 50 feet tall, it is not 50 feet tall in Utah. Go ask a Utah forester how tall that tree really gets in Utah with the lack of water.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I mean, the biggest misconception that limits how long our trees grow and how successful they are is in a lack of understanding of what it takes to grow a tree here. It is the case. I mean, to Landis's point, there are a handful of species, all of which we would consider to be a poor urban species for their just lack of strong wood and things like that, and they grew only along our creeks here. Now, it's a choice that's made for how our urban and built environment is going to function and how it is going to feel and what it's going to look like. And trees, no matter, I often I have the saying with people that when we eventually colonize Mars or the moon, we will actually bring trees with us. This city or this valley is a perfect example of that, where people go, trees come. If we are going to live there and be comfortable and happy and healthy in a harsh environment, we're going to utilize the benefits that trees provide. This is why they're infrastructure, by the way, one of the reasons. And but people forget that every individual tree in a setting where trees don't naturally grow, which is really any city, are a choice. And they have to be nurtured, they have to be committed to and maintained if we're to continue to get the benefits from them.
I think that's a great point that you've made, Tony, especially where people go, trees follow, and they don't have legs, but they are, historically, and this goes back millennia of trees being an important part of cultural development and human settlements over, in various cultures around the world. And so thinking about like, well, there weren't trees here before, so we don't have native species to grow on our streets today. Yeah, but as to your point earlier, we didn't pave things back then either, and yet we do that now, and we take that kind of practice for granted. So the tree is part of a human settlement, and I think that's really, a really great starting point in your conversations in your communities about the importance of trees as infrastructure. Where have you seen policy or design work to protect trees, and where have you seen it fail? Tony, I know you have a good example, I think, from Michigan.
From Michigan. I'm trying to think here. Wait, his question. Sorry, the question is where we see.
Where are we seeing good policy, and where have we seen bad policy in terms of tree protection?
Well, east of the Mississippi, they are, considerably further ahead of where we're at here in the Intermountain West with policies to protect trees. I mean, I'm trying to think of what the Michigan example is.
Sorry, I didn't cue you up for that one. You told me it was this story. I thought it was Michigan. It was a few years ago, or maybe a year or so ago that you told me the story, but it was a community that created some policy, and the idea, I thought, was to protect trees, but in the end they lost a lot of trees because of the policy that they implemented. But now I don't remember.
I don't know, but I do have another example. I mean, so where does policy work? Now, eh, I've been doing municipal forestry for 25 years now, 3 different cities. And one thing I can tell you is that policy only works if it has its finger on the pulse of the community where it's being applied. I I mentioned back east, we're talking about where cities are carved out of forests, oak forest, hickory forest, hard maple forests. And in those communities, it is not uncommon. I worked for 2 of them, and there were many, many others that would actually regulate what people could do on their own private property. We're talking about residential here. You want to put an addition onto your house. There's an oak tree in the way. The city comes and says you simply cannot do it. And now, why is that possible? There's an appetite for it there. This would never fly here right now. But timing is everything. There could come a time in the future where that does work. And I will tell you one more thing with regard to that is most of the time, stronger tree preservation policy is driven by what the community would consider to be a tragedy. I don't know how many people here are familiar with who Mr. T is. He was when I was young, he was a really cool, strong guy, wrestler, whatever, movie star. Well, he moved into a community with his new money from his fame, North Side community of Chicago, beautiful area, a couple acres of land, old growth, oak forest, and he bought a beautiful old mansion, and he wanted everyone to be able to see his mansion from the road. So in one fell swoop, he had a tree company come in and remove, I don't know, 50 or 60 200-year-old oak trees. The community freaked out. And that was the start of tree preservation in that part of the country, really. And that was the kind of origin of the types of ordinances which tell people, yes, it's your property, but the value of the trees transcend property lines. And so we're going to, work to make sure that, again, true compromise is made. Not the compromise where we say, well, we're going to cut it down and give you some money, but a compromise that says, we want you to build on your property. We want you to enjoy your property. But we also recognize your property is going to be there after you're gone.
So similar, this happens in planning departments and code enforcement departments. When someone says my neighbor's tree is bothering me, I'd like them to cut it down. Like, they don't get that right, but they do get the right to trim pieces. So that's a pretty standard policy, but we don't have the policy. It's the opposite of my neighbor has a great tree and I want to keep it. And then when they cut it down, everybody's bummed out because their tree's hot, their house is hot, and so on. I don't know of any place that does policies like that, but that's something that, maybe Eastern cities have figured out as one of the benefits of having those preservation policies. We generally just don't have them, and it's a place where shade is so valuable. It seems like there's a true economic benefit to doing that.
This is where I'll defend Logan a little bit and then throw him under the bus. But I think what Logan did to this process shows a possible way forward, where they did hold several public meetings where anyone could come, and they tried to be as transparent as possible. You can go to their capital campaigns page on Logan's website. You can see all the studies I've done. They've done surveys. They, again, went door to door down that whole street and asked everyone for their feedback, try to explain what the city was wrestling with, and then they greenlit money to try to find another solution that was better. But then, like I said, to kind of bag on Logan a little bit, their planner admitted that that is not their process, and they would not do it unless it was people that had the available time and resources that the people on this street had. So I think maybe it's not the perfect solution either, but it's better than what Logan has done everywhere else that had taken down trees. So I think moving that direction and normalizing that idea that trees are infrastructure, trees are valuable, and the city shouldn't just be able to go in one day without any heads up and take out trees. But it should be a process. People should have a chance to push back. And I think, and I'm hoping Logan now has seen it and gone through it once, and maybe it'll become policy for Logan and just standardized for everyone.
I'd like to open the floor for anyone in the audience who has some questions. I'm gonna run the mic up the stairs.
And Molly, I think we got the notification 2 or 3 minutes.
All right. Okay, so my question's there's been this kind of back and forth about compromise throughout this entire discussion. And I just want to know a time that maybe one of you or all of you have had to compromise on maybe a value for something else. As a lot of planners have a lot of balls in the air and a lot of things to juggle, compromise becomes a pretty critical part of what people in this room end up doing. So, how do you compromise maybe a value in a way that ends up being productive, and maybe give us some insight on how to do that ourselves?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at this. I think that, well, first and foremost, I will say I am not a tree hugger. I'm a tree pragmatist. And with that comes an understanding that not all trees are created equal. I think there's a tendency in my discipline of arboriculture, and especially urban arboriculture, for people in positions like mine to say, hey, you can't do anything at all, and choosing to battle over absolutely everything. Now, we certainly don't do that here in Salt Lake City, recognizing that that multi-million-dollar projects must go forward. Oftentimes, the compromise happens to be over the loss of an existing tree asset versus the loss or the lack of improvement in the capability to grow future tree assets. And this is something that's still kind of becoming a way of thinking as cities develop. But to me, and it may sound weird, but there's no tree more valuable than the spot and space where that tree can grow. It is the space, the capability, the capacity to grow the tree that truly matters. Just like us, I mean, a tree has a lifespan, and it's not going to last forever. And oftentimes we find ourselves fighting for trees that maybe only have 5 years left, when what we should be doing is compromising and making sure that we are preserving space to grow a tree for generations into the future.
I'm not great at compromising with this because I feel like the trees are our kids. Like, would you compromise for your kid? Would you cut back what you fed them every day, what you gave them? But so anyway, it happens. I think you just have to pick your battles. One of those compromise, I guess, that I would say is focusing more on tree planting. I want to have tree preservation. But I also really need to get people to plant trees anywhere and everywhere. So one of the things I've been really promoting for our city is not focusing less on trees in the park strips. That's my plug. Like, trees and park strips are not doing great these days, and if you have small park strips, they're doing much worse. That's how South Salt Lake was built, and not very few things are wider than 3 or 4 feet. And I'm focusing more on getting people to plant trees in their yards. So our current efforts right now, we give away trees. Tree Utah is our partner. We have some grant money. We just hand trees out to people and say, please put this in your yard and take care of it. And that's somewhat making up for the loss of public trees.
You got one more question back here.
Go ahead. Only if there's time, but we are talking a lot about trees versus development and how to keep them alive when development's knocking at the door. But you said yourself, and I think most of us see in our jobs, that a lot of times the trees are being removed because they weren't cared for properly. And sometimes that's by residents, sometimes it's by the city itself. So how can we make progress in that regard? Like, or where do we see how does a perfect world in that sense function, or the vision for the future to how those trees get cared for?
First and foremost, put down your screens, people. Get outside, touch the grass, touch the trees. No, this is, you're talking about how do we sustain living infrastructure here, and the answer is that we put input into that. The solution is education and outreach, having these conversations, leading by example. I mean, in our city, again, there are lots of people who you can tell they're doing something differently with regard to their landscape. And over time, I mean, forests, urban forests, they contract and they expand. And I think the argument makes itself, which is the right thing to do, and it's just it's just a matter of time. So that's probably it.
Uh, Probably about it on time. I just wanted to wrap up with this statement that we can't afford to. If we say we can't afford to protect trees, or we often hear that, but can we really afford the cost of losing them? Especially when often those trees may outlive us if we let them, and that's really part of that framing of infrastructure. We have sewer infrastructure that will outlive us with those trees as well. And I think care is a great way of kind of closing out that conversation, and maybe something that we could think about. How do we build that care into not just our policies, but our programming in our cities? I just wanted to put in a plug for a book that I've been working on for a while. Tony and Sharen and I and another colleague wrote one of the chapters about trees and the use of trees in urban design. I encourage you to check it out. It will be published later this year, so it is almost ready for pre-order. So I guess you could bookmark the link from the QR code. But thank you again to Landis and Tony and Sharen for joining us today, and thank you for your questions and your engagement in the session.